Today we're going to talk about how to record and process amazing sounding drums using only 4 mics. Now you may be asking yourself, why only 4 mics? And the answer is actually a question. And the question is, do you have an 8-channel interface, or do you have 8 mics to record with? I didn't have either of those for years, and I assume many of you don't either, but that's okay because there are still ways to make your drums sound awesome, and we're going to get to the bottom of that today. So you'll notice I used a hodgepodge of mics here. I did this purposely just to kind of prove a point that you can really use whatever you have on hand. Don't let anything disqualify you. Don't let not having a matched pair of mics disqualify you. Just grab what you have and be strategic with it. Speaking of strategy, we're going to spend some time on mic placement. And also just a note, make sure that your source tones are what they need to be. Make sure you get great takes, tune your drums well, hit your drums hard. So I think that goes without saying, but I wanted to mention it anyway. With only 4 mics, we're being strategic. We're going to place one on the kick, aimed straight at the beater so we get the attack that we need. Just as well, we're going to use a snare top mic. This is pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy here. We're also going to use a Glyn style overhead method where we place a mic shooting across the tom, aiming at the snare, and then another mic over the kit aimed over the center of the snare. And just a note, make sure both mic diaphragms are equal distance to the snare. Okay, step 1 is complete. We have mic'd and recorded our drums, so bravo, well done. Now we're moving on to step 2, which is just basic drum mixing. Okay, so in the intro I said I was going to show you how to record and process awesome sounding drums. Now I'm not going to do a super deep dive into drum mixing because I think that in and of itself is probably a whole other video, but I do want to give you some basic stuff to start with. So my process for drum mixing goes like this. I go through all of my drum mics and get just a rough balance of what I like. So with my kick and snare levels and my overhead levels, and a lot of this you can do to taste. There's no hard fast rule here, but just get a good idea of just a basic volume mix. Okay, and then from there what I will do is I will go in and pan what I need to pan. So overhead left, hard pan left, overhead right, hard pan right. Nothing too crazy there. Okay, then I'll do some corrective stuff, right? So I'll go in, and in the case of my kick, it needed some phase correction. It was out of phase with everything else, and so I flipped the phase to get it back in. Just as well, I'll do some gating along with that. So I gate my kick to just really focus it so I can adjust it later. I don't gate my snare because I just love the liveliness of the snare, and I will gate toms. But in this case, we don't have toms. We only have 4 mics. Okay, so after the gating, I will go through and do some EQ adjustments. You'll notice here I did some stuff to the kick to focus that low end and get a little bit of snappiness. And then in the snare, I actually used 2 EQs. I used one for some broad strokes and another to kind of notch out some stuff I didn't like. Same with the overhead left and right. Went in with some EQ there. I actually bust these overheads to an overhead bus so I could group process them. Alright, and then after the EQ, I'll go in and do some compression. In this case, I really wanted it on the snare especially to really give it some just squishy snappiness. And so I've got that going. I think it was hitting around -8, which is a lot of gain reduction, but it sounded really cool, so I left it. Speaking of compression, I did some bus compression over all the drums, and also some saturation with Devil Lock here. And so after that, I was left with a pretty cool product. I'll let you hear the OG drums first before I did any of this. And this is just bust stereo out, nothing on it. Okay, and here is everything with all of that processing and rough drum mixing that I just talked about. Flipping back to the old drums. So pretty noticeable difference there, I think. And so that's where we're at with basic drum mixing. And now we're going to move on to the third and final step of this process. Okay, third and final step, of how to record and process drums with only 4 mics. We're going to cheat and we're going to create more drums. We're going to create something out of nothing, or actually, I guess it's just we're creating something else out of something. The first thing we're going to create is a room mic. And so we're going to simulate this by taking our overhead left and our overhead right, and we're actually going to return these to 0. So you'll go back, return these to 0, no panning, and bounce it in place in Logic. That's just Control B. You're going to bounce that in place, call it room, all that. Once it bounces down, bring these back to hard pan left and right. And once it bounces down, now you're going to have just a stereo file of just the overheads. And so what you're going to do here is you're going to simulate a room with a reverb like Valhalla, and then an EQ, like just any stock EQ will work just fine, just like that. Okay, starting with reverb, because you can actually, especially with Valhalla, you can do a lot of EQ adjustment here. I chose a room mode, obviously, because we're creating a room, and I played with the exciting snare room preset, adjusted the mixture around 40%, the pre-delay to about 10 milliseconds. The decay you want to keep between, I'd say anywhere between this, 0.4 seconds to 1 second. You really, honestly, 1 second might be pushing it just a little bit. You really do not want to go much past 1 second because it starts to sound very artificial and weird. Unless you're going for like I recorded these in a cathedral feel, which most of the time you're not. And there's a lot of stuff here with some EQ and dampening that you can really take advantage of to kind of simulate the reduction of those high-end frequencies, because drum room mics, typically when they get further away from the source, you start to lose a lot of the high end. And so we're simulating that here, but that's also why we are using an EQ, because we're rolling off around 15. This was just a really annoying frequency and it was driving me crazy, so I also cut it. But that's basically what we've got with our drum room mic. I'll let you hear just the room mic that we created. So that's our room mic, and it really adds something to the rest of it. I'll let you hear this. And it's subtle. It really is subtle, but it just adds more life and more realness to them, because that's what we're going for with the room mic. Okay, so after the room mic that we just made, we're going to make 2 more mics. We're going to create a kick out and a snare bottom using our lovely friend Slate Trigger, or Trigger 2 as it's called in my DAW. And if you're like, okay, I'm pissed because you're asking me to spend more money, all I have to say is go work an odd job, get $100, get Slate Trigger, because the alternative is, you little stinker, is going out and buy more mics or another interface. So I'm saving you money, darn it. So just get Slate Trigger and be the happiest person in the world. So making 2 more mics, right? I'm making kick out and snare bottom. There's not much to this other than I literally just loaded in a kick out file for the kick out and then a snare bottom from the snare bottom. If you are really pinching pennies, there's actually a free plugin called Snare Buzz that you can use for a snare bottom, but you're gonna want Slate Trigger. It's just really good. And I adjusted these accordingly as well. Brought this up a little bit, brought this down. Wanted to get some boom, wanted to get a little bit of buzz here. So that's what we've got. We now have turned 4 mics into 7 mics. You should be so proud of yourself if you're following along with me. Well done. Okay, so after all of that, let's hear again what our original just dry 4 mic drum kit sounds like. Again, nothing on that, just straight to stereo out. Okay, now after all of our hard work in processing, both just mental and emotional, and then also literal processing, let's hear how our drums sound. Okay, I think that sounds sick. I think that sounds super great. If you're following along, well done. Congratulations. You've turned 4 mics into 7. It's a freaking miracle. So I hope you got a ton out of this, but that is not all, my friends, because in the description I have linked a document that you can reference for mixing and processing drums. It's just great, easy to understand stuff that you can reference while you're mixing and processing your drums, and I think it's going to help them sound great, so be sure to download that as soon as possible. Just as well, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. It lets me know that you don't hate me and helps me know kind of what's next. What should I do next? What do you want to see? You get to let me know, and hopefully I can help you all out with that. So until next time, go make amazing music.